Thank you, Irini. Esteemed guests, distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen, let me first express my gratitude to the organizers, the President of the Parliament of Cyprus, Mrs. Anita Dimitriou, and of course to the Vice President of OSCE, Mrs. Harlambidis, who had the inspiration for this event and for inviting me to give this speech. Thank you, Irini. Cyprus' most alarming problem concerning corruption is the rapid deterioration that has been recorded in the last years. Independent institutions and media, therefore, have a very critical role to play to stop and, if possible, reverse this very dangerous trajectory. We are the Audit Office of the Republic of Cyprus, meaning that we are the so-called Supreme Audit Institution, SI, as it's well known. And we are members of INTOSAI, the International Organization of Size. The audit of financial management appeared almost simultaneously with the organization of man in societies as early as the 3rd millennium before Christ. Commercial laws and audits appear in Babylon. Also in Egypt, in the days of pharaohs, there are accounts of inspectors who recorded the import and export of cereals. It was a very basic form of auditor. However, the concept of financial audit and control was crystallized and took the form that it has today in ancient Athens, almost 2,500 years ago, where it was one of the most important institutions of the Athenian democratic state. Plato, the ancient Greek philosopher, summarized the basic principles of auditing as a means of public accountability. The two basic auditing principles mentioned by Plato are still in force: transparency and, of course, the independency of the auditing body. Thousands of years later, in 1789, the need for accountability of those who govern was acknowledged by the French revolutionaries when they drafted the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, as it's called. Amongst the 17 articles that set out the so-called natural and inalienable rights, Article 15 deals with accountability. Nowadays, the concept and establishment of audit is integral in public financial administration, as the management of public funds represents a trust. Audit is an indispensable part of a regulatory system, the aim of which is to uncover violations of the principles of legality, efficiency, effectiveness, and economy. That's what we call the 3 E's. Economy, efficiency, effectiveness. INTOSAI, besides providing support to SAIs, also sets standards for public sector audit. The most fundamental standard is the so-called Lima Declaration that was adopted in 1977 in Lima of Peru, and it is considered to be a kind of a Magna Carta of government auditing. The second most important standard is the Mexican Declaration. The Mexico Declaration was adopted by INTOSAI 30 years later in 2007 in Mexico and sets out the 8 core principles on SAI independence. You can see these 8 pillars in the chart, but I'll come back to that later. It is important that the importance of these 2 declarations is manifested by the fact that they have been recognized by 2 resolutions of the United Nations General Assembly in 2011 and 2014. I underline the fact that they constitute part of acquis communautaire. Let's focus again on the principles we set out in Mexico Declaration. This is the gist of the proper functioning of SI. Please have a look at pillars 2, 4, 5, and 6. The head of the SI shall not be threatened in the normal discharge of his duties. Also, the SI shall have unrestricted access to information the right to prepare reports, and the right to decide when the report will be published. Well, let's see what happened when we decided in July 2019 to carry out an audit regarding the implementation of the so-called Cyprus Investment Program. That was mentioned by Franz Waltz 2 minutes ago. That is mostly known as the Golden Passport Program or scheme. There was a delayed response of several months by the executive following our request for data and information regarding the foreign nationals who had acquired golden passports and the list of law and accounting firms that had acted as intermediated providers. Then, in November 2019, an investigative committee was appointed by the Council of Ministers. We waited for some more months for them to complete their job, but as time was passing, we decided that we could not wait any longer, and so at the end of August 2020, that is 13 months later, after we had asked for the data information, we expressed our intention to initiate an audit in the premises of the Ministry of Interior. We managed to gather the files of only 5 applicants, and then, all of a sudden, the Council of Ministers decided to appoint another investigative committee, and the Attorney General, at that time, it was not Mr. Glerides that is here with us today, but his successor, decided that our audit should not take place while the committee was performing their investigation. So the government refused to provide us with access to any information. Nevertheless, we managed to complete the audit regarding the 5 applications that we had in hand. We issued the first report on 24th September 2020. The findings were very negative. We highlighted the abuse of power by the Council of Ministers. We indicated that the granting of golden passports to the spouses of the applicants could be a Trojan horse for criminals to acquire citizenship through their spouses. It was proved later that Mr. Glerides, who was Attorney General back to 2015, at that time had given warnings to the government that what they were doing was illegal. What they do? They just simply ignore him. And the well-known reportage that Irini mentioned before of the foreign television network Al Jazeera that followed our report confirmed our findings. The undercover journalist that presented himself as the representative of a rich Chinese businessman was informed that in case there was a problem with his application, his wife could make the application instead, and his case could easily follow without any obstacles. Subsequently, by using data from other sources, we managed to perform an audit on the granting of citizenship of 64 persons related to a Belarusian company established in Cyprus. We are still facing huge difficulties with our audit due to the refusal of the government to give us access to the files kept at the Ministry of Interior. However, by using other sources of information, a new report was issued by us at the end of November 2020. What followed was threats for my dismissal. Mr. Glerides mentioned something about that. For those who do not read Greek, this means they are asking for Odysseus' dismissal for misconduct. There were even references in the media that a criminal procedure was about to be initiated against me. In other words, there were threats that I would be sent to jail. Fortunately, when we referred the issue to Intosai, our organization, they issued a very supportive statement, and soon after, the Conduct Committee of European Union size released a very strong statement calling the government to step back. After that, the whole issue came to an end, let's say happy end. It was proved that EU and Intosai protective measures for SAI independence are effective. Well, let's see now about who is responsible for the prevention and detection of fraud. It should be noted that the prevention of fraud and corruption and their discovery is neither the responsibility nor the primary focus of the work of an external auditor, as SI. The primary responsibility for the prevention and detection of fraud rests with those charged with the governance and the management of the ODD, in our case, with the executive. If the auditor identifies a fraud, the international standards on auditing require the auditor, it's not a choice, it's a requirement, to communicate these matters in a timely manner to the appropriate level of management. The auditor should also determine whether there is a responsibility to report the occurrence or suspicion of occurrence to the prosecuting authorities. With which, as Mr. Kleridis stressed before, the cooperation should be very close in order to see perpetrators sent to jail. You all understand that fraud and corruption thrive when transparency and accountability are absent. SAIS, being a fundamental institution for promoting transparency, contribute to the prevention of fraud through transparency and the created fraud alert. Well, what about the relationship of SI and the Parliament? According to Lima Declaration, the independence of SAIS shall guarantee a very high degree of initiative and autonomy. SAIS report their findings to Parliament directly or sometimes, as the case in Cyprus, through the executive. The reports shall be published, and this will ensure extensive distribution and discussion. And of course, this brings to the surface the role of the media and journalists in the fight against corruption. That's something that I'll come back later. In 2017, OECD issued a paper that deals with the relationships between SAIS and parliaments, which are the two most important players for holding governments to account. You can see the so-called accountability triangle. The foundation of the relationship between SAIS and parliaments are the audit reports that SAIS sent to the parliament. The establishment of good working relationship between SAIS and parliament is very important in order to increase the attention parliaments pay to SAIS reports. SAIS have the responsibility to produce high-quality reports, but parliamentarians like you also play an important role in the utilization of SAIS report. A parliamentary audit or accounts committee, usually known as a public account committee, is one of the methods parliaments can choose for dealing with SAIS report. So now let's go back to the role of the media. The media is a fundamental channel for keeping citizens informed of the SAIS role and of their reports, and also to safeguard transparency, which, as we saw, is a lethal weapon against corruption. Drew Sullivan, just before, explained, of course, the vital role of the investigative journalism reporting. This is also very important. So it is important that the audit message is well and effectively communicated, and the burden lies on the shoulders of journalists. Could the media play a negative role? Could they act in a way as to disregard the SAI? Of course, they could. Should they? I think it's their choice, and they are absolutely free to act as they like. Could they be offensive and shameless? That's me. Sorry to be naked. Could they be obsessive? In some cartoons, you may have noticed also the Honorable Mr. Kleridis, the ex-Attorney General, who was also very often satirized, like I was, and was systemically the victim of obsessive criticism. So, I think let's leave behind the unpleasant moments and return to the cases where the media play a positive role in the accountability framework. Previously, we saw the accountability triangle. I put it in a smaller scale of it on the left side of the slide. in this triangle, citizens, of course, are not mentioned, but the parliament will deem that represents the citizens. For this to be true, the media plays a key role. So effective media contributes to the successful functioning of the accountability system. The larger scale figure shows the interaction of the media with citizens, the executive, those that have the power, and also the accountability institutions like courts. Free and independent media is the fourth cornerstone of a democracy. That's what Drew Sullivan said a few minutes ago, and of course I fully agree with him. An independent media sector is conceptualized as one part of a system of accountability that helps mitigate corruption and misrule. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Michailidis.